we're going to be talking about this rock from the time of Moses when the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness. This is one of the stories that actually was kind of like one of the final points to convince me that this is all true, all this Bible stuff. When I was investigating this, in my early 20s, started out with the kind of the evolution paradigm getting debunked, and so I was open to looking at the Bible after sort of realizing that there was credibility to like the timeline, the young Earth timeline, and things like that. And similar to the Genesis 22 story that we talked about last week, this is going to be one of these stories that prefigures the cross, but not in an overt way, not in a direct sort of prophecy. And this passage from 1 Corinthians chapter 2 is one I like a lot, where Paul says, but we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, the hidden wisdom which God ordained before the ages for our glory, which none of the rulers of this age knew. For had they known, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. So I think one way of looking at this is that God had this plan, and he wanted to communicate that it was a plan, but if he were completely overt about it, then the people that he was dealing with wouldn't have carried it out like he had planned, right? You can't show all of your cards, but he masterfully worked both people who were his allies with his enemies to bring about his plan. So
it was on a need-to-know basis, right?
Right, but so there's all these things in the Old Testament that foreshadow what happened in the Gospels, but only in hindsight do you realize that what this all means. Just like last week we talked about Genesis 22, it's a really weird story where Abraham's told to sacrifice his son, and that seems completely out of the ordinary, for to say the least, for God to demand a human sacrifice of one's own son. But then when in hindsight you realize, well, this was a prefiguring of God offering his son as a substitute for our sins, and that it happened on the very same physical location on the earth. And so this is going to be something similar like this. Okay, so Horeb is first mentioned in Exodus 3, where it's the story of the burning bush, where Moses is sort of in exile or in kind of on the run after he kills a man. He goes to the land of Midian, and there it says that Jethro led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And this is where Moses saw the burning bush. Now, Horeb is sort of used interchangeably with Sinai. Sometimes it's referred to as the region of Sinai, or the region of Horeb, or the mountain of Sinai, Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb. They're kind of two terms to mean to refer to the same area. So just to kind of get that out of there, it's sort of like with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and then they have their Hebrew names, but we tend to use those names, and I can never remember their Hebrew names. And this is sort of similar. Like we talk about Mount Sinai a lot, and so more so than Horeb. So if someone just mentions Horeb, do people?
No,
you don't think Sinai when you hear Horeb, right?
No.
But they are kind of referring to the same thing, right? And Horeb, I think, is derived from the Hebrew word for desert. Sinai has kind of an unknown origin, I think, or might refer to something pagan or something. But go ahead, Danny.
I noticed that his father-in-law it's a priest of Midian. So Moses had godly people around him, whether he knew the Lord or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure that was, if he was a priest of Yahweh. Lou, do you know? I mean, the Midianites
had
a
priest of Yahweh
was
through Ishmael.
All right, very good.
Oh.
So,
I'm telling you, that Lou is a fountain of information.
good, yeah.
nobaceous
Thanks,
for it.
Katie. It's very kind of you.
Well, it's true.
After 5 years, she's giving me a compliment. Finally.
Takes time.
So Horeb is outside of Egypt, and this is so when we get to Mount Sinai, this isn't like the first time Moses is in that area. This is the same area that he had fled to, where he saw the burning bush years earlier. So in Exodus 17, we read that Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me." And the Lord said to Moses, "Go on before the people, and take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand your rod, with which you struck the river, and go." So this is what the rod he used to part the Red Sea. "Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, that the people may drink." So the people were ready to, they thought Moses was going to have them die in the wilderness. They didn't have anything to drink. Yeah, they were ready to revolt. And so God says to strike this rock, and that water will come out of it, and that he will be there on the rock.
Does that mean we can strike Lou and information will come out?
No.
I disagree.
And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. So he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the contention of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" So those words I have highlighted, those are the same words.
So
You
Meribah
kind of
means contention, huh?
right. Meribah means contention, and Massah
Massah
means
means
tempted.
tempted.
Yeah. So then a little, later in the story of the Jews wandering in the wilderness, this sort of happens again, where now they're in the wilderness of Zin, in Kadesh, and this would be closer to Israel than where they had started out in Horeb, probably like north of Horeb and Sinai, south of Israel. And now there was no water for the congregation, so they gathered together against Moses and Aaron. And the people contended, that's that same word, with Moses, and spoke, saying, if only we had died when our brethren died before the Lord." Talk about drama, right? "Why have you brought us up to the assembly of the Lord into the wilderness, that we and our animals should die here? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there any water to drink." So Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and they fell on their faces. And the glory of the Lord appeared to them. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the rod, you and your brother Aaron, gather the congregation together. Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water." Notice he says, "Speak to the rock." He doesn't say to strike the rock.
See?
"Thus you shall bring water for them out of the rock, and give drink to the congregation and their animals." So Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels. Must we bring water for you out of this rock?" Then Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation and the animals drank.
Moses was disobedient.
Right. Then,
But I wanted to ask a question. Were those people held against their will that were
Well,
following Moses?
no, I guess they could have wandered off, but what are you going to do? They're out in the middle of nowhere.
I asked the question because they're blaming him. You've done
I
this.
feel like they have nowhere else to go.
Yeah. They're
Stuck out here.
kind of
just
stuck
like you
together. I
wander
mean,
off into the woods.
He's the leader,
By
so
yourself.
they're asking.
Your families are there, you're not gonna go off with your.
yeah.
Isn't that one that died? Was that his wife?
I mean, they weren't in chains,
Was
but
that Miriam?
they were.
I'm thinking choices,
Moses' wife that
They
died?
chose to follow. him.
Sister.
Yeah.
Sister.
Yeah.
So at this point, both choices look like death.
Right.
Following him, leaving, like,
Yeah.
they both look like death. They're stuck.
I mean, they're probably not real keen on the idea of going back to Egypt. They could easily
Some
get
of
killed
them
then
thought
too,
they were
right?
better.
Actually, they thought they were better off.
Yeah.
But if they did, if they said,
Yeah.
okay, forget this, I'm going to go back to Egypt, would they be well received in Egypt at this point, or would they be killed?
By the
So
way, you're gonna have to swim through. the
They've
Red
sort of-
Sea.
If they can find their way back.
they've sort of burned that bridge, I think, with
Right.
Egypt.
I didn't get back across the river.
Right.
Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe me to hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. This was the water of Meribah, because the children of Israel contended with the Lord, and he was hallowed among them. So this doesn't seem to be the same actual rock, but the same sort of circumstance where here's the rock that's going to yield water, and that God had given him instructions on the previous rock in Horeb to strike the rock and bring about water. And this time he told him to speak to the rock, but Moses struck it, which was just, he seemed like he was just, maybe because that's what he had done the time before, and he was expressing frustration with the people. But God didn't like that he struck the rock, because he didn't tell him to strike the rock. So the question is now, and the consequence is he's not going to get to go to the promised land. And so this is one of those stories that, kind of like the Genesis 22 story, it seems a little odd on its face until you realize what God's trying to communicate and why did God tell him to speak to the rock this time versus striking the rock. And it's because he's painting a picture of the crucifixion, that Christ would be struck once, not repeatedly. And so this he's setting up a symbol, just like he had done on Mount Moriah and in other places, where he's like the Passover, where he's making this symbolic parallel story that in hindsight will make sense. And Moses has screwed it up. If he had spoken to the rock, then you would have this nice story about the rock that was struck once to give water and thereafter spoken to give water. But Moses struck the rock and destroyed that symbolism, except that we have the account of how it was supposed to go. So in spite of that, we get the message that God was trying to communicate. But that's why God, it seems on the face of it, it's like, why did God make such a big deal? So he hit a rock, but it was because when God gives these seemingly arbitrary instructions, like he does with much of the law, with the Jews, there's symbolism behind it. And if you don't follow the instructions, then the symbolism gets lost. So in Psalm 78, there's a reference to this splitting of rocks. We read it's a part of this psalm, which is quite long, that he split the rocks in the wilderness and gave them drink in abundance like the depths. He also brought streams out of the rock and caused waters to run down like rivers. So this kind of gives a picture of like the scale of this. This is not like a little spring or a fountain. This was a lot of like gushing water, a big rock. This was like a big deal. You had a lot of people, right? And then later in the psalm it says, and because it also talks about him providing them food and manna and things like that. And then it says, in spite of this, they still sinned and did not believe his wondrous works. Therefore, their days he consumed in futility and their years in fear. When he slew them, then they sought him, and they returned and sought earnestly for God. They then remembered that God was the rock, and that Most High God, and the Most High God their Redeemer. So here in Psalm 78, even long before the New Testament, 1,000 years earlier or so, you have this connection being made that the rock represented God. We read in Moses that God would be on the rock, and even in this picture, if you look carefully, you'll see a figure there where the water is coming out. It kind of reminds me of the Lincoln Memorial, very tiny inside the statue on the penny. If you look real close, you could see the angel of the Lord there where the water is gushing out with Moses beside it. So in 1 Peter chapter 2, he writes, coming to him as to a living stone, rejected indeed by men, but chosen by God and precious, you also, as living stones, are being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Therefore, it is also contained in the scripture, behold, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone, elect precious, and he who believes on him will by no means be put to shame.
Amen.
So Jesus is the rock, right?
Yep.
He goes on to say a couple more passages here. Therefore, to you who believe, he is precious, but to those who are disobedient, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. They stumbled, being disobedient to the word, to which they were also appointed. Then in John 4, we get a bit about the living water, where Jesus is talking to the woman at the well, and he says, if you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. And then later Jesus answered her and said, whoever drinks this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life. So you have Jesus is the rock, and he provides the living water. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul writes, moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with most of them, God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness, right? That generation died off in the wilderness.
Yeah.
But he's making very explicit the connection that the rock that was giving them water was a picture of Christ, that he was effectively, that rock was a metaphor for Christ. Now, it says here that the rock followed them, and I read one commentary talking about, picturing like an actual rock like following them. I don't think that's what that's saying, but like, because we seem to be reading at least two different settings where a rock served the same purpose. So God followed them, and whatever rock was being used was the rock that was there, but they didn't actually have like a rock moving with them. And next week we're going to look at some of these locations in Sinai or Horeb, and the rock's still there, and it's it looks a lot like in that painting we just
That's
saw.
your picture of the rock. There was a thing on TV, I think it was CBN bringing it out, and they actually seen this mountain that is black at the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
And they figure that's where
Sinai,
where
where
come
Moses
up.
received the Ten Commandments. Yeah, I don't. Depending
That's
on
like a
time,
preview.
depending on time, we might get to that this week, but it'll probably be the next lesson.
Yeah,
We've
okay.
got that.
Are you gonna have, just out of curiosity, any maps that show where all this is
Yeah.
happening in line with what's going on today in Israel?
No,
No.
not. Well, we'll see some maps
I
of
mean,
where
like-
these
like maybe in
locations are.
overlay or-
Well, I mean, we know where Israel is today, right? Yeah.
So yeah, Kadesh is 80 miles from Gaza.
80
To the-
miles north, south?
To the south, yeah.
South.
In Hebrews 6, the author of Hebrews, whoever that might be, says, for it is impossible for those who were once enlightened and have tasted the heavenly gift and have become partakers of the Holy Spirit and have tasted the good word of God and the powers of the age to come, if they fall away, to renew them again to repentance, since they crucify again for themselves the Son of God and put him to an open shame. So they're saying, at least speaking to Hebrews, so I don't want to get into a whole side thing about, does this apply directly to the body of Christ today, or is this something for those that were under the law? But he's saying that people who knew the truth rejected it, then if they come back, it's as though they're crucifying Christ again, and that's a bad thing. So this is sort of in line with this concept in the Old Testament about striking the rock again, that Christ is only to be crucified once. In Hebrews 7, he says, speaking of the contrast between Christ's sacrifice and the old covenant sacrifices that were daily or repeated, he says, who does not need daily as those high priests to offer up sacrifices, first for his own sins and then for the people's. For this he did once and all for when he offered up himself. And in chapter 9 he says, for Christ has not entered the holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Not that he should offer himself often, as the high priest enters the most holy place every year with blood of another. He then would have to suffer often since the foundation of the world. But now, once at the end of the ages, he has appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. And as it is appointed for man once to die, but after this the judgment, so Christ was offered once to bear the sins of many. So he's really emphasizing this point that it's one sacrifice, and that's it. In Romans 10, Paul says that if you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For with the heart one believes unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. For the scripture says, whoever believes on him will not be put to shame. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, for the same Lord of all is rich to all who come upon him. For, and then he quotes Joel 2:32, whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. And so here we see the part about speaking to the rock, confession with the mouth, that we speak, we pray to God, we ask for salvation. We don't re-crucify him. He's not perpetually being crucified. He died once, and that sacrifice was sufficient for all time. And all we have to do to receive that grace is speak to him, which is really cool that was laid out way back in the time of Moses. So now you have this consequence that Moses doesn't get to enter into the promised land because of his disobedience. And so the question is, what now? So God makes another symbolic foreshadowing in how he deals with the situation of Moses not being able to enter into the promised land, because Moses is a symbol for the law, right? He's used sort of even interchangeably with the law in the scriptures, where the books that he wrote are called the law, and sometimes his books are referred to as for in Moses we read, or sometimes the law is called the law of Moses. And so Moses is himself sort of a personification of the law. And then now he's not able to lead the Jews into the promised land. So who leads them instead? Who is able to lead him into the promised land? It's Yeshua, Joshua, which is the same name as Jesus.
Huh.
It's Jesus is just the Latinized version of the Greek rendering of Joshua, which is actually itself it's really Yeshua in either case.
I like the way the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, and he's saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, rise. He don't take any time to say, all right, buddy, let's go.
Yeah.
Today we'd be mourning and we'd be.
Yeah. So once Moses is dead, now it's time to go into the promised land. And Joshua,
Wow.
I think is,
Listen to the way we look.
why Joshua? Well, his name means Yahweh saves.
He was taught.
Yahweh is salvation. And that's the same name that Jesus would be given too. And so that here you have Yahweh saves, leading them into the promised land where the law couldn't do it.
Did he give you an idea how old he was?
I don't know. What's that?
No, that's it, Moses, the law.
Right. So they couldn't get to the promised land
Right.
by following the law. They needed a savior, and appropriately here, then Joshua's name, meaning Yahweh saves, is the same name that would be given to Jesus. So Jesus needs to get us salvation. We can't achieve salvation through the law alone. So in Joshua, the beginning of his book, as Danny said, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, you and your people, to the land which I am giving to them, the children of Israel. And then in Hebrews chapter 4, this is just a small excerpt, but this was sort of a longer passage describing this parallel between entering the promised land and entering God's kingdom. It was symbolic. And actually, where it says Joshua here, in Greek, it's the same name as Jesus. It says Jesus. In fact, in the King James Bible, it's sort of mistakenly, I think you could call it a mistake, puts in verse 8 Jesus, but it's talking about the Joshua of the Old Testament. Jesus is his name in Greek, but when we're reading it in English, we have a distinction between Joshua and Jesus because one's being transliterated from Hebrew and the other one's from Greek. So, we kind of, because of our translation method there, we kind of tend to lose this connection between Joshua and Jesus and realize that that's like the same name. And it gets really muddy here in this passage because now you're going from Hebrew to Greek to English. So in the New King James, they kind of corrected it to make it clear that we're talking about the Joshua of the Old Testament in this passage. But the point of it is, it gets a little bit obscured in English, but they're the same name, and that there's good reason for that. It says, if Joshua had given them rest, then he would not afterward have spoken of another day. There remains therefore a rest for the people of God, for he who entered his rest has himself also ceased. For he who has entered his rest has himself also ceased from his works as God did from his. So he's talking about when God rested on the seventh day and ceased from his works. And then there was this idea that entering the promised land would be rest, but it wasn't the ultimate rest. The ultimate rest comes from having salvation through Jesus Christ, and that this was really just a picture of that greater truth that would come later.
Wasn't Joshua about 80 when that happened?
I don't know. You may be right.
Caleb was
Just a
about
kid.
the same age
Okay.
as Joshua. Caleb was 80 when he conquered his own land.
Moses was
100,
100 and something.
was it 120?
120 when he died.
120, yeah.
All right, so we're doing good. So let's keep going and talk about these locations. I thought we might have to save this for next week, but now we'll talk about Mount Sinai, which is also called Horeb, and some of the evidence, sort of the physical evidence of these events from Exodus. So in Galatians 4, Paul writes about Mount Sinai being in Arabia.
Oh, okay.
And the Mount Sinai on a map today, that triangular peninsula there in the center of the map is called the Sinai Peninsula, and it's part of Egypt. And that red dot at the bottom that's labeled Jabal Musa means the mountain of Moses. That's also known as Mount Sinai.
Is that real, or is that just somebody's?
Well, that's the question. That's on maps. The traditional location of Mount Sinai is there on the Sinai Peninsula, which is not in Arabia.
Yeah, that's what,
So where did this idea come from that that's Mount Sinai?
I don't know, back then,
Anyone, I think we mentioned it last week, but anyone want to take a wild guess of who misidentified a biblical site?
Lou.
It was Constantine's mother. the same one.
It's another problem.
Yeah, the one that went all around, and she was, identifying all these sites. And
You mentioned her.
last week, she did the same thing. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is where she
Right.
discovered the site of the
So
crucifixion.
she's batting 1,000, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
What was her name?
yeah. And so here we are,
Helena.
Helena,
Oh,
like Helena, Montana.
So you have to remember, what an honor. All of a sudden, Mount Sinai's in the Roman Empire because the border is basically,
The Red Sea.
well, it's the border between Israel and Jordan was the old border of the Roman Empire.
That's right.
So it'd go up the Gulf of Aqaba. And so it happened, now it's in Egypt, the province of Egypt. So now it's in the Roman Empire.
So that's a picture of the
wow.
traditional Mount Sinai. Across the sea is this mountain, which here in Arabic is called Jabal Makia, I think it is, which means burnt mountain. I think this is the real deal here,
That's
Okay.
Was that what
and this
it
is
was?
in Arabia,
Because of the fire.
right? So see how it's all black on top. That is metamorphic rock, which is rock that has changed form due to heat. Yeah, like volcanic activity and things like that.
You gonna talk about the chariot wheels?
The what?
You gonna talk about the chariot wheels?
No, not this week. I don't have the chariot wheels in here. Maybe next time. Yeah, there's evidence of chariot wheels at the bottom of the Red Sea.
Wow.
Um,
Oh, yeah.
But here, Exodus 19, we read that it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain, and the sound of the trumpet was very loud, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was completely in smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. I should have highlighted fire there too. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. So here you have this description of the mountain that had fire and smoke at the top of it when God came down,
Couldn't
right?
argue about that.
And so now you have this mountain that's all black on top because the rock has been heated and changed form.
My Lord.
So are there people who try to say that was a volcano?
It is like even on Wikipedia,
Yeah.
it says that mountain range that black rock on top is metamorphic rock that's from volcanic activity.
Right.
I mean, it's not an active volcano,
Right.
but it has the characteristics of
All the characteristics.
what you would get at a volcanic site.
So what does black rock mean?
It was hot at
It's
some
very
point.
hot.
At some point, something was hot at the top of that mountain to make the rock.
I was
Change
thinking,
shape.
because I saw an ad for, on TV, Black Rock
Oh,
Restaurant.
Oh yeah.
That's where you cook your own steak.
Well, I think it's a rock that's black, but
No. It's very hot. They serve the steak raw and you cook it.
right, you cook it on
Very
the
hot.
rock. I don't know what kind of rock it is, but I assume it's rock. I've
Very
never been
hot,
there.
yeah. Black.
But the image here of God descending onto the mountain in fire, and now you have a mountain or a mountain range that has this black rock at the top of it that is as a result of heat. So Mount Sinai in Egypt doesn't have that, and the locals in Saudi Arabia identify these sites as having to do with Moses. This isn't like, and it's been closed off until recently. There have been some documentaries about this where people are sort of in secret sneaking around to see these sites because they're not allowed to be there, And now, very recently, it's starting to open up for tourism and stuff because the local government is kind of realizing that people aren't there to plunder it, and that
Oh, that's
this
why
is
they
that's part of
had
it.
cordoned off.
part of
It's mainly because how can the Jewish holy mountain be 212 miles north of Mecca? That's like an impossibility. How can they be?
Geographical.
How can they be in the same country?
The Saudis,
God could make it happen.
they're getting ready to build a highway or something, and it's really gonna mess up some of these sites. they're on the, you know.
Oh yeah, they're building that 150-mile long city that's
And it'd be right smack there.
70 yards
What's the name
wide.
of mountain range in, what was the name? I didn't write it down.
Jabal
Oh,
Musa.
well, that's the one, Mount Sinai in
Arabia.
the Sinai Peninsula. The one that we're looking at is called Jabal Makia,
Oh yeah, Mike.
Maqia. And there's another one just north of it called Jabal Lawz, I think, Lawz, and it's in the same range. And you know, some will say that that's Mount Sinai, but really a lot of this terminology, like last week we looked at the mountains of Moriah or Mount Moriah, and it was sort of more like a range of mountains. And so our custom of talking about mountains is usually sort of specific to one peak, but that isn't necessarily the way they're looking at mountains. Back then it was more like Mount Sinai may have been kind of counted as the whole range of mountains, but it looks like this peak, Makia, I think is a stronger candidate than the one a little bit to the north based on, you know, its appearance. The other rock has some of that blackness too, but it's a little less dramatic like than that photo we saw. And then we're going to look at some of these other sites around it that seem to fit with the Exodus and the accounts of Moses. So reading on in verse 19, and when the blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him by voice. Then the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai and on the top of the mountain. And the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. And so this is a picture here of we're kind of at the bottom there is the base of the mountain, and then at the top you can see this is I didn't label this. This is on Google Earth. So I don't know how things get labeled on Google Earth, but that point at the top is labeled Mount Sinai of Yahweh. So this is the one in Arabia, and you know it's labeled right like that on there. And so we're kind of looking. This is not a total aerial view, but what they call 3D. So we're kind of looking at it at an angle to see a little bit better the shape of the mountain. But you can see all that blackness at the top, and then at the foot of the mountain is something labeled the Moses altar, and then there's another site that's marked in green without a label that we'll get to also.
Was that the one where the Lord spoke to Moses to tell the people no one to touch that mountain
Yeah,
or they would die?
I believe
That's
so.
what
Yeah.
I'm thinking, yeah.
What are you talking about?
Mount Sinai.
No,
Yeah.
That Moses went to the top of the mountain, but the people were to stay at the
They
bottom.
weren't- Yeah, they better.
So this is a picture of the site that's labeled the Moses altar there, and you can see it's sort of like a angled series of rocks. And in Exodus 20, when speaking about altars, sort of in a general sense, God says that when making an altar, to use earth to make the altar and not to use cut stone, not to use tools. They were supposed to use natural rocks to build it and not tools and bricks and things like that. And that's what this altar looks like when we'll see it up close in a minute. And then in Exodus 24, talking about this specific altar, we read that Moses rose up early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And so this site is at the foot of the mountain. This is another angle here, kind of looking at where those that sort of arrow shape comes to a point. You see a couple of the rows and then some of the mountains behind it. This is, I think, actually, I want to say this might be pointed to the south. This isn't looking at that mount that's black on top. This would be kind of facing another direction. But you can see that those rocks that are arranged there, they look like the kind of rocks that like we have at the side of our house. They're just rocks. They're not bricks, right? They're just natural rocks arranged there. And then just nearby, so those that you can see like a row of the rocks there on the right. So we're kind of like turned to the left from the previous picture. You see those are, I think they're marble or limestone cylinders that they're in ruins, but they look like they were pillars, right? And so remember when he said, don't use tools, that was for the altar. The pillars weren't the altar. He built the altar and also 12 pillars. So, right. So these are clearly man-made, those aren't natural cylinders. So you have, this altar that's made of natural stone, and then right by it you have what looks like the remnants of what could have been pillars, right, scattered all around.
Pillars are still there.
Yeah, I mean they're not intact; they're knocked down and scattered around, but they look like the sort of bricks that would make good pillars, right? Yeah. In Exodus 32, we read, "Now when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, the people gathered together to Aaron and said to him, 'Come, make us gods that shall go before us. For this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him.'" So they've given up on him. He's been up on the mountain a couple days, and they're like, you know what? Forget this guy. Let's make an idol to worship, right?
Moses.
I know.
Aaron was weak.
These guys. Yeah. And then Aaron received the gold from their hands. They had the gold that they had plundered from Egypt, and he fashioned it with an engraving tool and made a gold calf. Then they said, "This is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt." So when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it. And so what's in the picture here is what was the green spot on that map, a little farther away from the mountain. And this is another altar, of clearly like stacked rocks, stacked by people, not just a natural formation. And it's fenced off, but we have some pictures from inside. And on the rocks are all these drawings of calves, so cows with horns, right? You can zoom in on that a little bit. See a bunch of drawings of, what looks like cows, right? Petroglyphs, yeah, right. Rock paintings or etchings. Here's another one of the rocks. You can see more of it. So like all over these rocks, it's just cow after cow. Like it's not just like a whole bunch of different things. What's that?
One of them kind of looks like a camel.
Could be, but I mean, I see which one's the camel. Is there one with a hump?
Yeah, it's like the top. Kind of looks like it has a little hump to it. Top right.
Top right. I don't know. Oh yeah, you're right. I
It's
do
a
see.
camel.
But mostly we see things with horns that look like bulls and things like that.
Yeah, the
So
one up in upper left has the,
yep, bendy horns and yeah.
well,
Oh yeah, there was like a little man there too.
Yeah, the arrow.
Stuff in the desert did not deteriorate like other places, it's so dry.
Yeah,
oh, that's
yeah, they don't get a lot of the water erosion because it gets a little rain.
No, it gets sandblasted.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So that angle we were looking before, this image again from Google Earth, so it's sort of like satellite images rendered onto a 3D map. Now we're looking north. Before we were looking west. Kind of, you can see the things that are in the square at the bottom there are arranged differently. They were top to bottom before, now they're left to right. So looking to the north, and the distance between, say, the altar and the top of the peak there, I think it was about 2 miles. So up on the top left, there's something labeled the Split Rock of Horeb. And that's really only, as the crow flies, a few miles away. It would probably take a little bit longer to walk there because of the terrain, but it's nearby. It's still in this Horeb Sinai area. And here's a picture of it.
There you go.
It's this rock at the top of a peak, and it's split right down the middle. And that painting I showed earlier was obviously something that somebody was aware of this actual rock when they painted that image. Some of the other images, you get all these different kind of images of how the rock is coming out. That one was kind of neat because it was modeled after this actual rock. So this is, just another picture, and it's kind of hard to tell, I think, when you look at these photos, like, how big is this thing, right? Like, is that 5 feet, 100 feet, you
It's as
know?
tall as you, Tom.
Well, here's a picture of a guy standing at the center, and if you scale that to the image,
Yeah.
you can see it's massive.
Oh,
And so that painting we saw earlier that showed the angel of the Lord in right where this guy's standing and Moses beside it, that was pretty well representative of real life scaling.
Did you create that graphic, Tom? That was awesome.
Yeah, I did. The movement,
That was really cool.
I had some help from Apple Keynote, but yeah.
good job.
Good job.
And then where is this stuff kind of on the map? We were looking at the land of Midian. The sites we were looking at are sort of like where that number 5 is
Uh-huh.
in that region there, or kind of near the letter M of Midian. And then Kadesh, which would be the site of the second rock, where Moses struck it and he shouldn't have. You can see that's farther north.
Back up. I'm having trouble connecting.
That's okay.
The split rock?
Yeah.
What is the importance of that? Is that Kadesh?
No, the split rock was near Mount Sinai. So
Oh, okay.
So the first rock that we read that Moses struck properly and that the water came out, it looks like that rock is still there.
Is
And
that
it-
the split rock?
Yeah,
Oh, that
the
was.
split rock of Horeb, right, the first time.
Ah.
The second rock, I don't know of, that's still an unknown. The one in Kadesh. So I was just showing on the map, just to give you an idea, the cluster of sites that we were looking at, were, right there.
So Moses struck that rock on Mount Horeb and it split
say it right
and water gushed forth, right?
Right. So the sites that we looked at were all kind of clustered down in the area where it says
Number
land of
5.
Midian.
Yeah.
And the second incident with the rock where Moses struck it when he shouldn't have, we were told was in Kadesh. And that's, you can see, much closer to Israel. That was, later in the story as they're wandering through the wilderness. And they were wandering, there's something, I think, is it at the beginning of Deuteronomy, where it says that they're like 11 days journey.
Yeah.
And then it says, so 40 years later,
Yeah.
they're clearly not making good time. They
How
were,
far was where it says number 5, there, land of Midian to Kadesh, miles?
I don't know. We'd have to look at a
I
map and
was just
see
wondering
the
what the
scale.
scale is.
Yeah, I mean, it's not.
So what you're saying is that they were on their journey to Israel, and that's where he got stuck. So Moses
Right.
never went any farther than Kadesh.
Yeah,
No.
well,
He went all the way up to Nebo where
Yeah.
Madaba is.
but as the narrative progressed, the early parts of the story in Horeb or Sinai was there in that land of Midian area, and then later, they were traveling not in an efficient path or anything like that, but they were getting closer to Israel by the time that second, because we were told it was in Kadesh, so that's just marking where that is now. It would be neat if we could find another split rock there. There very well might be, but that's not something that has been identified
Way up in the northeast.
so far. So if Mount Sinai is here,
Yeah.
then they must have crossed this inlet, because this is all the Red Sea down out of the frame, right? So these are kind of like different inlets at the edge of the Red Sea.
Which is kind of why, because I was wondering why you referred to it as a river the second time.
Well,
Well, in the scripture, you had
River
said that it
or
was
bond?
equal.
I think he mentioned river. This
No,
is
the-
talking all the way up here.
Right.
Is that what you were talking about when you said river?
No, what I was, so,
I need a laser.
what a handy map, huh? So this is the traditional route that Constantine and his mother came up with.
Okay.
Over here.
That they crossed the sea.
They crossed right here, in this area. Over here, though, the new route across this area, we're not gonna call it Sinai, because that's what Helena called it, the Empress.
It's Eastern Egypt.
Right here, because before the Suez Canal was dug, this was called the Red Sea too. But when you're, you know, transversing ocean ships, you have to get very accurate where you're going. So they started calling this the Gulf of Aqaba. But this was always called the Red Sea until the 1870s.
Yeah, it's just an inlet.
Thanks for that clarification.
And then